Well, very good afternoon. We are coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to the week ahead. It is where we set the tone for the week ahead on the news front. As always, I'm your host, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at your headlines. Well, free Zuma protests spill over to Gauteng. Sporadic protests in parts of Johannesburg broke out last night. It has been 2 weeks since the government instituted adjusted level 4 lockdown regulations. Today, the National Coronavirus Command Council will meet to assess the country's response to the pandemic. And sport, Khodatso Monjane has another chance to win a Wimbledon title today. She plays in the ladies' singles wheelchair final on the same day that Novak Djokovic aims for an all-important 20th Grand Slam. All right, now taking a look at our top story for this hour. There's heavy police presence in and around Hillbrow, Johannesburg. All this as the protests continue. For more on this, let's cross to our reporter on the ground, Amungile Dumako. Amungile, a very good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I mean, just transpiring in Hillbrow on your end, what is the latest emerging on that front?
Good afternoon. Quite a lot of events taking place in and around the CBD in Johannesburg. We are now here at GPS Town. This is where we discovered that there was a break-in at a liquor store. We understand that there is those culprits who are still stuck inside. This is one of the gentlemen who are behind the break-in. I'm sure you can see he's being handcuffed. There's a lot of activity happening here, and of course, with this turmoil happening, or rather, unfolding in and around Johannesburg. This is one of the first culprits who've been arrested following that break-in at that very liquor store. Police having to handcuff him and take him away. We're not yet sure and certain as to what really happened, but we see a lot of police in this part of Johannesburg. We see a lot of Metro Police as well taking this gentleman away, and of course locals trying to establish as well as to what really happened. Some haven't rushed here wanting to find out what really transpired, hoping to, of course, to get 1 or 2 bottles from inside this liquor store. This gentleman has been stuck inside the liquor store, we understand, for about an hour now, as he's tried to sort of make his way out, but was actually hindered from doing so by the police officers. Let's try to take a listen if we can be able to pick it up what they say.
John Foster. Sharp. I'm not satisfied, man. That's why they need to out just keep it in.
It would seem from the conversation these gentlemen are having here, they're not satisfied if this is the only culprit who is actually inside that liquor store. They're saying that they must go upstairs that liquor store and actually check if there isn't anyone who remains behind there. And of course, this young chap that has been arrested is being now taken to the John Foster, they say, in custody. We can also see some people inside this very van in front of us here. I don't know what's going on, but you can see there's gentlemen inside this van as well. Tabi, so if you might be able to find out what's going on. Molen madoda ninjani? Kwenzeke ntoni ukuthenile lapha mfondini? Liyikuhlwa ngihona no. Okay, niziva njani ke mfondini?
Kodwa nje ima ukuthi ngisho ukuthi mina
Kawusitshela niboshelweni wayini la ngaphakathi 11.
Mina ngiyakhuluma ke. Mina bangithole lapha la besingade eqezwe khona cha mina futhi umfowethu ngihambanga na. Mina umfowethu
bekunini ngoko?
Angizwa.
Bekusikhathi sini?
Manje
Yeah, these 2 gentlemen inside this van, they are telling us that they were actually at the scene and they were arrested because they believed to have been part of this break-in that was happening here. So 2 gentlemen inside this party we've just been in, 1 taken into John Foster, we understand. Police are saying that they want to find out still if there's anyone left inside this liquor shop. And of course, there's a lot of activity. Police having quite a lot of things to look out for. There's a lot of locals who've come here with the hope that they will get a bottle or two from that liquor store here. So there's a lot of activity that will keep an eye on to actually keep our viewers abreast as to what's happening. For now, it's back to you in studio.
Abongile, just perhaps to close off this discussion, I mean, you've highlighted the heavy police presence outside that liquor store. Also, we've seen live visuals coming through from suspects who have been apprehended and taken to various correctional facilities. I'm just wondering, though, given the sporadic protests that have occurred in KwaZulu-Natal and, this incident that has now occurred in Jeppestown in Joburg CBD, are the protests at all linked in any way? What's emerging there?
From what we've heard when we speak to the spectators, those who are surrounding this area, and there is this belief that this is an extension or it's linked to what we've seen transpire in KwaZulu-Natal. They're saying that this is all because they want to see the former president, Jacob Zuma, being released from prison, complaining that he was actually unfairly arrested. But I've got the gentleman here that I'd like to speak to and get a sense of what really happened. Sir, would you want to speak to us, though? Seemingly he's shy to speak to us. This is what we've been experiencing since we got here. People don't want to talk to us, but off camera they do give us some sort of information as to what they really think is going on. The information that we're getting then is that it's angry residents here in Johannesburg and surroundings wanting to express their dissatisfaction or unhappiness at the fact that the former president, Jacob Zuma, is sitting behind bars at the Escort Correctional Center in KwaZulu-Natal.
All right, Abongile Dumeka, we're going to leave the conversation there. Again, just the latest coming through from Johannesburg CBD. Our reporter Abongile Dumeka giving us the updates. Obviously, we've seen some suspects apprehended at just outside a bottle store where in Hillbrow, where the liquor store had been raided. Now, it is still, the details surrounding the event is still unclear. We're going to obviously wait to see what is emerging. Our reporters speaking to several people on the ground, them echoing that it is related to some of the protests that have occurred in KwaZulu-Natal. But as that situation is being monitored rather by a heavy police presence, the president, the African National Congress itself also calling for calm and for violence to stop. We'll continue to monitor that story as it unfolds. Moving on to other parts of the province, of the country rather, 37 people have now been arrested around KwaZulu-Natal region. This is since Friday. It's all related to charges on the ongoing violent protests across the province. Now, most of the arrests were made in Mpangeni on the north coast, where trucks were burnt, and in Moy River, where 23 heavy-duty motor vehicles, including a tanker and a car carrier, were torched. On that note, let us now bring in our reporter, Ayanda Mhlongo, who is monitoring the developments within that area. Ayanda, it has been a dramatic week as we've spoken to you, quantifying the assessment of the damages that have been incurred over the past few days. It is not a pretty sight that is emerging. Walk us through what has transpired on your end for today, at least.
Not a pretty sight at all, Elisa. Good day to you and to our viewers at home. Well, just a short while ago, in fact, we were at the Moy River Toll Plaza, where the government of KwaZulu-Natal, led by the MEC for Economic Development, Ravi Pillay, and the MEC for Transport, Community Safety and Liaison, Peggy Nkonyeni, had arrived to inspect the damage at the toll plaza, of course, following the protests by community members that resulted in 25 trucks being torched in the area. And what they have told us is, very importantly, that the province of KwaZulu-Natal has met government leaders, and there is now a plan and a safety plan that is in place. Of course, we're not out of the woods yet. In essence, these are because from tonight there are reports that the violence, we could again see a new wave of violence across the province of KwaZulu-Natal in anticipation of the sitting of the Constitutional Court tomorrow to hear former President Jacob Zuma's rescission application. Of course, many people on the ground are still insist that they are going to continue creating chaos and violence in the province until former President Jacob Zuma has been released from prison. The assessment of the provincial government so far is speaking about the cost They estimate the cost, the cost of the damage at around 100 million rand, and this is just largely here in the Amoy River area. Of course, they are still assessing damage in other areas of the province. Even this morning, Liesel, there were protests in Umlazi and damage to property. Shops were looted in the Umlazi township, and so we're still continuing to see these actions by community members in various areas. The government saying that they're very, very concerned, and they've condemned these acts, saying that they do have a plan in place. They are certain that they have adequate police reinforcement on the ground, and that they're now going to be focusing on strategic areas, and Moy River being one of those areas that is going to have a large number of police deployed to it along the N3 highway and the N2. There is also in strategic points going to be a lot of police officers and road traffic inspectorate officers that are on guard as well on the freeway. The N3 has been opened, but of course the government is cautioning motorists, saying that it's been difficult while they are happy with the deployments. However, the modus operandi, they're saying, of the protesters is one that is proving to be quite difficult for the police to respond to, because they are moving from different area to a different area. And so when police respond to a certain area, they protesters will then move to another. But another important point, tomorrow the economic cluster in the province of KwaZulu-Natal is going to be meeting. There's a lot of concern about the economy and what these protests, the impact of these protests on the economy are. At the moment, we are actually outside one of the stores that was looted here in the area of Moy River, and the MECs are inside inspecting the damage at this store. There's several others in this area. In fact, today a lot of stores that should have been opened are closed, and we understand that businesses are now rather fearful to open until the situation normalizes. Elisa?
Ayanda, you've spoken about the difficulty of the deployment of police personnel, particularly because of the modus operandi, that the individuals in question are utilizing. In terms of how and where police presence have been deployed, what new areas have emerged in and around the province as we speak? What tip-offs have you got on that front?
Well, we've asked the MECs about what the plan is, and the security plan, which they say is in place. They're saying that for security reasons, they can't divulge certain areas where, or they can't divulge what their security plan entails and which areas that they're going to be focusing. But of course, they did make mention of this area here in Moy River, that it is an area that there is going to be a large deployment of police officers. We've heard from South African Police Service over the past 2 days saying that the port of Durban, the port of Richards Bay, or also other areas that the police are focusing on and are monitoring. Of course, these are, that we've been reporting over the past couple of days in Escort, where the former president is incarcerated at the Escort Correctional Center. And so indeed there, that is another area where police are focusing, because there have been rumors that there are going to be supporters that are going to descend on Escort. So there are areas like Nkandla as well. The police reinforcements that are there are indeed still in those areas. And of course, Lisa, we're just judging by the areas where we know that there have been tensions. They're trying to spread out as many police officers as possible, but it's a vast province, and these protests are taking place all over the province. So it is going to be rather difficult, Lisa, for the police to be able to respond, as they have told us, to every situation. But in key areas, they have told us from the south to the north, from the west to the east, that they do have police officers standing by and monitoring the situation.
Well, Ayanda Mhlongo, let's leave the conversation there. In fact, from KwaZulu-Natal, let's move back to Gauteng, where we're also seeing some live visuals coming through. Obviously, speaking to our reporter, Abungile Dumako, giving us the latest about a looting that has occurred at a bottle store in Johannesburg. But in news just in, the SABC News team covering the protest in Alexandra have just been robbed. Natasha Piri and Gabi Njogweni, they were robbed of their equipment belongings just a short while ago. So as we can see, we're going to be getting an update from our political editor, Mzwandile Beje, just a little shorter, in just a short while. But obviously, heavy police presence in Johannesburg as protests that started a few days ago in KwaZulu-Natal have now spread into Gauteng. Different pockets are being affected within Gauteng. The latest coming through from Hillbrow and Jeppes Town. When we spoke to our reporter Abongile Dumako, we had just seen a few suspects apprehended, those who were at the scene, and also a suspect who was inside the bottle store apprehended for the looting of a liquor store. And speaking to people on the ground, it's just relaying how it is linked to the protests that started a few days ago in KwaZulu-Natal, linked to the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. So as we continue to get more information on our team that have been robbed, we're all in Alexandra. We're also going to keep you updated with the latest coming in with news all around the country. For now, though, we're going to move on to another topical issue that has been making the rounds. Of course, 21,610. This is the number of new COVID-19 cases that have been identified in South Africa. A further 265 COVID-19 related deaths have also been reported. Now, it actually brings the total fatalities to 64,138. Active cases meanwhile have increased to about 211,000. But to contextualize all these numbers, perhaps also get a more in-depth perspective on what has been happening regarding COVID-19, the pandemic, and what's emerging ahead of stricter lockdown measures. We're going to be speaking to Mia Malan, the managing editor of Becky Sisa Health. Mia, a very good afternoon to you. I dare say good afternoon. A lot is happening in the country. But when we shine a spotlight on what is happening on the front regarding COVID-19, we've seen the cases in Gauteng reaching its peak, slightly dipping. But obviously, this has to be incorporated with another 2 weeks of monitoring regarding admissions to hospitals and the numbers that will be coming through there. Can you just give us a breakdown on what has been happening in Gauteng before we continue to the rest of the country?
So, Liesla, Gauteng is one of the provinces that had the Delta variant that's now dominant in our country earlier than other provinces. And as you may know, the Delta variant is more transmissible than our previous dominant variant, the Beta variant. So in other words, it spreads faster from person to person. And that is why we've seen more cases than we saw in the previous waves in Gauteng. Now, even though we may see a dip in the wave in Gauteng, it doesn't mean we are out of the woods, because hospital admissions will now start to increase, because it takes time for someone from they get infected until they getting ill enough to be admitted to hospital. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks for that to happen. Yeah. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we are likely to see a significant increase in hospital admissions in Gauteng. And the other danger is, if we have, even though that wave has started to come down, that peak a little bit, we could have super spreader events. And at the moment, we have many protests in Johannesburg specifically, which poses a risk for super spreader events. So that is something that we would have to continue to monitor.
So you're speaking about super spreader events, and then we're also looking at dynamics beyond Gauteng. Limpopo and Mpumalanga are also facing a tough time, just related to the Delta variant itself. It seems to be also fast spreading there. How dramatic are the increasing cases looking like there, and what is also expected on that front with regards to the possible dangers ahead?
So we had genomic surveillance results that was released in South Africa last week, and that showed us that the Delta variant is now spreading the fastest in Limpopo. The second fastest province is Mpumalanga, and then KwaZulu-Natal, and then we have the Western Cape. And if we look at the NICD's report about hospital admissions and positivity rates in the country, so the proportion of tests that come out positive, then we have the highest positivity rate in Limpopo at the moment. About 44% of tests for COVID come out positive. So we're looking at a very fast spread and also a sharp increase in new cases in Limpopo specifically. And obviously, then we're also going to see an increase in hospital admissions. followed by that. And the increase in hospital admissions is not because the Delta variant causes more severe disease, it's because it spreads so much faster. So we have so many more cases, and then the number of hospital admissions increases because we have so many more cases.
It has been 14 days since the president last spoke, and we're looking at the numbers that have been highlighted. We're also looking at the regulations that have been put in place, needing to hear from the National Coronavirus Command Council and the assessment on whether it is working and perhaps where to from here. When we speculate and look at a possible scenario that can be put forth, I mean, what is likely to happen? What is on the cards for the country?
So if we look at the sharp increase in cases in all provinces and also hospital admissions, except for the Northern Cape and Free State, where the Delta variant started to spread earlier, then it would be very dangerous to, at the moment, consider relaxing restrictions when it comes to group gatherings, because that is the type of thing that leads to super spreading at events. And we also know that we're going to need hospital beds. And the one thing that we know works to open up hospital beds for COVID-19 is to put restrictions on alcohol sales. Now, there was a study that came out last week that showed us when it comes to unnatural deaths, so deaths that are related to alcohol in South Africa, then it works quite well to reduce those deaths if we have alcohol sales bans. But if we just have some restrictions, for instance, just restrict the hours of the sales of alcohol, then there's virtually no impact on the number of unnatural deaths that we have. And of course, that relates to hospital admissions, because most of those people that die first end up in hospital. So I would be surprised to see if we're going to not have any alcohol sales restrictions. There are suggestions on the table by some lobby groups that the study that I mentioned also showed that if you have a period where you say you can only sell alcohol, for instance, at a restaurant, not serve it on the premises, but have takeaways that people can buy, then there's still some effect and a reduction in deaths. So some groups are suggesting that if we take the economy and the impact on the economy in consideration, that might be some sort of compromise that we can reach to say no on-site consumption of alcohol, but there could be off-site consumption of alcohol.
Yeah, well, compromises during these unprecedented times, weighing the economic ramifications versus the loss of life is definitely something that the Coronavirus Command Council is going to be taking into consideration. I wonder if we can end off this conversation by, looking at some of the vaccine rollout plans that have been put in place. I mean, the latest coming through that come the 15th of July, 35 to 49 will be eligible to register and perhaps also, have access to the vaccine. I wonder in terms of that vaccine rollout, what can you discuss on that front? Some glimmer of hope for the country.
So the good news at the moment is that we are picking up on the number of vaccinations that we do. And from the 1st of August, we'll also start to do wide-scale weekend vaccinations. At the moment, our weekend numbers are still pretty low. So the aim is to, by the end of next week, to do 250,000 vaccinations per day. The highest number that we reached this past week was 190,000 vaccinations. And then by the end of August, to scale up to 300,000 vaccinations per day. And that is the best thing we can do at the moment, because the faster we vaccinate, the more people will be protected. The vaccines that we use, Pfizer and J&J at the moment, there is data for that they do protect against the Delta variant, slightly less than against the original variant that we started off with, but still very good protection. To give you an idea, just after one shot of Pfizer, it provides 94% protection against severe illness. So in other words, against hospitalization. And that is the thing that we want to have from vaccines at the moment. We want to open up, we want to keep people out of hospital, essentially. And the vaccines that we have work against the Delta variant when it comes to that.
Mia Malan, Managing Editor of Bekisisa Health, thank you very much for your time again. Mia Malan just chatting to us about the latest response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the measures that have been put in place. As I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, 21,610 new COVID-19 cases have been identified in South Africa. A further 265 COVID-19 related deaths have been reported. It now brings that total fatalities to 64,138. Well, we'll be back on the other side of this with more news and updates. Do stay tuned. You're watching The Week Ahead. All right, you are watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson, obviously bringing you rolling coverage of what is expected for the week ahead, but also taking a look at some of the top stories emerging around the country today. Earlier on, just speaking to Mia Malan, highlighting the effectiveness of the measures that have been put in place for the lockdown level 4 restrictions announced by the president 14 days ago. We, in fact, are going to also be speaking to our SABC politics editor, Mzwandile Mbeje. He's going to be updating us on the possible outcomes from the National Coronavirus Command Council meeting, and also some of these suggestions that have been put forth to curb the spread of the rate of infections, decrease hospitalization, and obviously minimize or attempt to minimize the number of deaths associated. Now, on that front, we continue to monitor the COVID-19 numbers in the country quite closely. Given the fact that there are concerns about super spread events that are happening, which is all linked to protests that have started in KwaZulu-Natal, now having spilled over into Gauteng, particularly in Jeppes-Town, and even Hillbrow, linked to the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. Now, as we also heard earlier on, our team in Alexandra, after speaking to locals there, speaking and monitoring the situation occurring with the looting of some of the shops and some of the sporadic violence and tensions that have called up in the area. They have now been robbed. We're still awaiting more information on that. The equipment, cell phones, etc., have all been taken away, the camera, etc. So as soon as we get more updates on that, we will also update you there. Moving from Alexandra, we move into Hillbrow, where when we spoke to Abongile Dumako, he was just giving us an update on the looting of a liquor store that had occurred. And as we spoke to him, there were live visuals coming through from the liquor store itself, where a suspect was apprehended, taken into custody, having been found inside the liquor store, and then also a few other suspects who said they were in and around the area were also apprehended. So as soon as we get more information on that, we'll continue to monitor and bring you the latest in that regard. So as I've highlighted, those were some of the top stories just happening today in the country, and we're also going to monitor what we can expect for the week ahead. The National Coronavirus Command Council will meet today, and they're also going to be assessing the developments in the COVID-19 pandemic within the country and the national response at large. The Council's deliberations come towards the end of a 2-week period, and it's during which the country has implemented alert level 4 lockdown. Now, the Council meeting will be followed by meetings of the President's Coordinating Council, as well as Cabinet. Now, to bring us the latest, SABC News political editor Mzwandile Mbeje joins us. Mzwai, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. National Coronavirus Command Council meets today, obviously assessing the developments in the COVID-19 pandemic within the country, the national response at large. Because of the different scenarios emerging in the different provinces, I wonder if a blanket approach is the best option forward. So on that note, what can we expect to come out of this meeting today?
A very good afternoon to you, Liesl, and the viewers. When you speak about the meeting of the Command Council, clearly they have a lot more on their plate, perhaps, than they'd anticipated. I don't think they will then let the opportunity pass to speak about the developments that are really happening in the country. We saw yesterday it was mainly the province of KwaZulu-Natal, so it has moved to Gauteng, so you never know where it will move to tomorrow. So basically, as the president is looking into this meeting with his team, these are the issues that will really weigh heavily as they need to make a decision going forward. You'd remember, Liesl, that today is actually day 14 since President Ramaphosa announced that the country was placed on level 4, and then he said after 14 days they were going to communicate to us. Of course, we don't know when that will happen, but the fact that they are meeting so does show that they are planning that at some point they need to then communicate to the nation. But I think, as I've said earlier, Liesl, the issues really that are gripping the country now need more urgent attention. The country really needs to respond, because you can't stand by when you see the destruction of properties happening, because that will influence or rather impact negatively on the livelihoods that they are trying to manage carefully. The issue of the coronavirus is a big, big problem. So when you see these crowds gathering again, so clearly whatever strategies that we are putting in place may not necessarily help. So you have to develop a multi-pronged approach to all these issues. We have an issue of protest that needs to be attended to urgently, and of course you have an issue of the coronavirus that is really continuing to rip through the country. So the deaths are quite high, and yes, as soon as those meetings are done, and we probably will be told when and how they will be communicated in terms of the way forward. Lisa?
Zwai, you know, speaking about the protests and the super spreader events which are of concern, we're also looking at the statement that was issued by the President and the African National Congress yesterday as well, citing alleged advance for violence in KZN can't be used to legitimize vandalism and public violence. I mean, this was a statement that was issued. Many people questioning the lack of response or action around that, particularly from the President and the party itself. And when we look at the nature of the address, I mean, when can we expect the President to address the nation after today's meeting?
Well, as I said, Lizelle, so we are not sure at this stage. What we know is that in his last address, the President said after 14 days he was going to come back and update the nation, looking at those measures they had put in place. Of course, it's the fact that they are meeting so does show that at some point, is it today, is it tomorrow? So at some point there will be some sort of communication from these meetings. Because clearly, Lizelle, you are dealing with a number of super spreader events now.
Yeah.
And those statements, yes, it shows that they are concerned, but people want to see action on the ground. In fact, many people have been questioning where is the intelligence services? Because, I mean, even an ordinary person will tell you that as soon as the former president was arrested, so many people basically said, no, we'll make this country ungovernable, so we'll do A, B, C, or D. So clearly, you'd assume that people who are trained to look at all those aspects will be able to be preemptive in trying to stop it. I mean, the fact that the major freeways are the ones that are being targeted, it tells you that it's the economy that will suffer. We saw N3 the whole of yesterday, so didn't really move because it was blocked, and you are affecting major economic activities. When you look at the Durban harbour and people getting the goods to Johannesburg and people not being able to take goods to Johannesburg, and then this morning, Lizelle, you wake up and then M2 in Johannesburg is also blocked off. Clearly, the government needs to be very alive to this, and I know that we did speak to, through my colleague Sophie Mkwena, to the Minister of Defence to say it looks like the police may not necessarily be getting a grip on the situation. Will the military or will the army be sent to assist? She basically said, well, at this stage, certainly not. But when you realize, I mean, our colleagues who are trying to do all they can to bring South Africans up to speed with what's happening, so are also falling victims. I mean, in Alexandra, so our colleagues really got robbed, and it tells you that the situation is really getting out of hand. If you then target those people who are able to give the picture to the nation of what is happening, who's going to do that? So government will have to act on this one. As they are meeting, yes, they are meeting about the issue that relates to coronavirus, but also they have to meet about the issue that relates to the protests that are ongoing.
Mzwai, you know, you've spoken about disruptions to service delivery, the impact of jobs, damage to property, and even security concerns at large. I think to wrap up our conversation, looking at the dynamics that is now, you know, unfolding across the country, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the alarming numbers that are coming through, how is this going to ultimately shape the political landscape within the country?
Well, we are witnessing events we could never have imagined a few years ago. And clearly, where we are as a nation, we've never been before. So we are not able to predict, but we can look at how the events are unfolding and perhaps make some comments relating to that. I think what is happening now, Lizelle, is that, and I remember my other colleague, Nosipo, spoke to, I think, one of the Izindunas earlier in Gauteng, and there's something that Nduna Mhlongo said. He basically said, well, as much as this irritates many people, the jailing of the former president, but it's more of a party issue. Yes, it's a party issue that spreads to the entire society. Remember, the ANC is the leader of society. So if the governing party, then is battling to deal with its own internal issues, it then affects the society. So what then happens is that because you have a clearly defined opposing groups, so you are having a situation where they are fighting, particularly because they know that in the next 18 months, if I'm correct, there will be an elective conference of the ANC. Clearly, some of the fights, some of what is happening now is being informed by exactly that. I mean, when you see people, some of those placards say Ramaphosa must fall. So that tells you that the political center stage is the one that is playing right now.
All right, Zwa, we're going to leave the conversation there. Zwandile Mbeche, again, the SABC political editor, just giving us the latest with what we can expect after the National Coronavirus Command Council is set to meet. We are waiting to hear imminently what the decisions are that have been taken. Perhaps also as a possible family meeting on the cards as well. We'll wait to see what unfolds there. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Ongama Mtinka, a political analyst, again, also joins us for analysis a little bit further. Ongama, thank you for joining us as well. Looking at the dynamics that are unfolding in the country, President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC calling for respect for the respective rule of law. This was yesterday morning. This was issued in a statement. But when we look at the approach, many are worried about this approach, saying that government is slow to action. How is this being perceived on the ground?
To you, Lizel, and your viewers. So it's important that government acts when the time is right. There's a fine line between suppressing political activism and doing effective policing in ways that ensure the safety and security of the republic. Obviously, President Zuma's supporters have got a right to protest. So they could not have been nabbed in the preparations for such a protesting. What's important is that police are at the right place at the right time when those protests turn violent. Obviously, there are procedures as well in terms of lodging protests, which, where protests have got to be approved and police must be prepared well in advance. Even if those are not followed, it's important that our police force is acting in ways that do not respond to the invitation to be framed as suppressing protests and the rights of people to express themselves politically. So there's a fine line here. It's important that the state, acts in a way that is, one, accepting that this is a democratic country, but also prevent the kind of chaos that we saw over the past 2 days.
Ongama, I'm so glad you've highlighted, that the fact that the ANC has noted that the Constitution does protect the right to protest, but they've also noted that, you can't abuse or break the rule of law, even destroy property. So when we look at the manner in which these protests have been conducted, there are some alarm bells that have been raised. I mean, over 27 people also arrested in KwaZulu-Natal alone, and now, these protests are sporadically also flaring up in Gauteng. Gauteng. With the PEC and the NEC, being deployed to KZN to intervene and also engage, what measures are we expected, not only in KwaZulu-Natal, but the country at large?
That's important political intervention by the party. Remember that this is an ANC problem, which is, playing out as a national, possibly national security issue. So it's important that interventions are made at the level of the party and swift action gets taken against those that are mobilizing communities to act in an unlawful way. So I'm happy, for example, with the reports, if they are true, that some harsher actions are being considered against some of the leaders for instigating these protests, some of them against the constitutional order of the Republic and intimidating the execution of the orders that come from the legal system. So those are very important. But again, as I said, the state has got to manage the extent to which it intervenes lawfully and violating people's rights. So, for example, people have raised issues of bringing in intelligence agencies here. And it's easy to see who can be targeted for that intelligence action because there are leaders of the ANC that have gone out openly to encourage acts of violence and raising the country and making the country ungovernable. So one would expect that if those leaders are targeted as leads for intelligence gathering, that the due processes get followed in line with the law. But one would not suggest that those leaders shouldn't actually be monitored because some of them have actually gone out to agitate for violent rebellion.
We spoke to Mzwai, our politics editor, and he spoke about the party issues, the internal party issues, and perhaps how it ultimately also affects society broadly. And when we look at how these protests are going to shape the political landscape in the country, this is beyond the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. It's also leading to local government elections and ultimately the party elections come 2022, if we are set to go according to those timelines. How are these dynamics shifting that political landscape?
Sure, that's important. So the leaders of the ANC have got a number of considerations to make. One, to keep the status quo, which South Africans have regarded as unbearable anymore. And keeping that status quo means continuing to structure compromises between the warring factions that help them remain together so that they minimize electoral losses. There's another view, which is a long-term growth view that says the party must no longer make those compromises, and it must act very boldly and courageously against those within itself that are propagating a chaotic and destructive political arrangement, especially in relations with the rule of law. The implication of that action is weakening the party in the short term as far as electoral prospects are concerned. But my view is that they would need to keep the foot on the accelerator to make sure that this process is continued. It's the price we must pay. The short-term instability is the price we must pay in order to force South Africa into a new way of a political culture, to force the ANC itself into a phase in which the party is reclaiming its historic commitment to values. In order to do that, this action must be undertaken, and the instability is part of the process. So it's a price that we must pay. It's a price that those who are in the leadership of the party may need to pay. And it may even include being reduced to below 50%. But it actually does give them a platform that is correct and a lot less complex to build a party for the future.
Ongama Mtinka, political analyst, thank you very much for your analysis. There again, just unpacking the dynamics that are currently transpiring within the country. From Ongama, we're going to be joined by a legal expert, a legal analyst rather, and director of the Zikalala attorneys, Mpumelelo Zikalala, for an analysis on what we can expect tomorrow. I mean, obviously, we know the Constitutional Court will hear former President Jacob Zuma's application for rescission of his 15-month sentence for contempt tomorrow. This is obviously having filed with the Apex Court seeking that rescission. Mpumelelo, walk us through the processes set to unfold.
Tomorrow, the applicants, which is the former president, is going to present to the court reasons in which they say the Constitutional Court must vary or rescind the orders. Now, in the affidavit, they have said that this particular judgment was obtained through an error of law. There are certain things which were not applied. There are certain instances or evidence in which the court looked at that it didn't, wasn't supposed to look at it in the first place. There's also another avenue in which they are saying this particular process should have gone in another route to the NPA for prosecution, and as it has been the case in a similar matter that was heard in the Supreme Court of Appeals, or that occurred in the Supreme Court of Appeals. However, in their submission of their evidence or their affidavit, they were supposed or they ought to deal with the requirements of Rule 42, which is, I think it's Rule 21 or 29 in the Constitutional Court, which says under what circumstances can a rescission or a variation order be obtained. And that particular rule is very simple. It says if a judgment is sought erroneously or granted in absence of the affected party, then you can say, okay, let's reorder or look at it again. Or if the order is ambiguous, meaning can't be understood what exactly must be performed at what time, by who, that is not clear, then the court can then say, let's look at it again. Or if it is obtained through a mistake which is obtained or identifiable by both parties, then it can be understood. But in this case, you'd know that the State Capital Commission is opposing, simply saying there are no grounds in which the former president has stated or has subjected to the court, detailing why that particular judgment must be rescinded. So on both sides, it will serve an opportunity for them to present their cases to the court, and also give an opportunity to the State Capital Commission to oppose as to reasons why that particular application should not be successful.
But I just want to look at some of the, reasons that have been cited for former President Jacob Zuma upon the application of this rescission. I mean, there was health conditions, the COVID-19 pandemic, age was also a factor. I believe also being financially disenfranchised and then receiving poor legal advice. These seem to be some of the motivations put forth. So when we assess what has been put forth, is it going to sway decisions? Will these actually stand as plausible factors?
For personal circumstances of the former president, that will not sway the Constitutional Court judges, because they would say those type of arguments should have been given to us or given to this court at the time in which we had invited them. Let's remember, there are more or less three occasions in which the court said to the former president, please come to us. We have a matter before us that involves you. We need your input in this matter, and we can't move forward without hearing you. On 2 times, the former president snapped those proceedings. And on a third one, the Chief Justice went an ordinary step by saying to the former president, we hereby we're looking for information or an affidavit for your submissions. Can you please write us an affidavit which is not more than 15 pages so that we may be able to consider them? So the personal circumstances are not looked at when one regards what is required by Rule 42 of the Rules of Court. Actually, Rule 42 simply says, the only reasons in which could qualify it is when you didn't know that there was a particular matter that was taking place in any court, or in this case, in the Constitutional Court. You are not served with the papers. If you knew, you would have put up a defense. Secondly, you do have a defense in which you are going to put up in what you are accused of. So willful default in a person who knew that or ought to have known that they are going to court and they didn't do anything about it, the chances of them succeeding are a bit small. The only chance in which maybe they could sway the judges would be to say, if he comes up in an argument of saying, my absentia must not be looked at in the narrow sense of absentia. Look at my absentia in a wider perspective of saying, my advice was saying that I shouldn't participate in these processes. Had I known that if I don't, this is the type of punishment I'm going to get, certainly I would have made sure that I participate. So I did everything I did based on the legal advice that I had got. However, let us look at the unique circumstances of this nature, because you have given me something that you would not usually offer to anyone who is in contempt of court. Now, let's go back a bit. If you are found in contempt of court, usually the court would give you one last chance to comply. If you fail to comply, then it's usually a fine or a suspended sentence or both. Now, in this instance, the Constitutional Court bypassed all those processes and said, we have inherent jurisdiction due to the circumstances and other ways in which you have behaved. We can see that even if we give you one last chance, you're not going to comply. So instead of giving you another chance, let's move straight into punishing you, not with a suspended sentence or a fine, but let's give you an unsuspended sentence, which would require direct imprisonment.
We've seen different scenarios being put forth, and some of them are just speculation. But when we look at the worrisome scenes surrounding the alleged protests in former President Jacob Zuma's name, looking at how this will perhaps aid or damage perceptions, and just, I mean, obviously we know that the courts are independent, but considering these dynamics that are unfolding across the country, if they do rescind or lessen the sentence, can they be seen or accused of giving into these threats? How do these dynamics all fit in?
It depends on, the court has to deal with whatever they are dealing with in terms of the rules. What makes it more crucial that they do so is that they're an apex court. So everything that happens or anything that happens within the Constitutional Court will trickle down to the lower courts. So they shouldn't set precedents in which it will show the courts buying down to external pressure, certainly pressure which is not within the law. Now, the rules are rules, and an applicant is given an opportunity to draft their affidavit and put their evidence in the manner that they so wish. The courts can litigate on behalf of the former president or anybody else. So they're going to simply say, you have made this application out of your own will. You know or ought to have known what Rule 42 states and the requirements required in order to have a successful case. We are going to look at your matter within those particular circumstances. Anything else that happens outside of the four walls of this courtroom are not going to bind us or not going to touch us, or we can't be bothered with them, because there are other agencies in which they're supposed to take care of that, like law enforcement agencies, which must make sure that there's law and order in South Africa at all times.
All right, Mpumelelo, we're going to leave the conversation there. Legal analyst and director of Zikalala Attorneys, Mpumelelo Zikalala, just giving us a preview analysis on tomorrow's court proceedings, where former President Jacob Zuma's application for rescission of his 15-month sentence for contempt will be heard tomorrow, of course, having filed an application to the Apex Court. Well, moving on to news further afield from South Africa. South Africa's Defence and Military Veterans Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says that there are no tensions between South Africa and Mozambique. The minister further noted that even if they were, it wouldn't affect the decisions of the regions. Now, it comes after Rwanda was deployed, has deployed troops to Mozambique to help the country combat the escalating insurgency that is threatening its stability. For more on this, let us now bring SABC News international editor Sophie Mukwena. Sophie, a very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I mean, unconfirmed reports coming through that are suggesting the conflict between South Africa and Mozambique exists. South Africa's Defence and Military Veterans Minister coming out to deny this. What is the reality on the ground?
Clearly, this is a Minister of Defence, and there's no way a Minister of Defence can go public and say that there are tensions between South Africa and Mozambique. She is a politician, and she is part of government. It is something that is not being done. They always address such issues behind the scenes. And of course, the Minister of International Relations will have to ensure that she is able to try and resolve and ensure that there is synergy between South Africa and Mozambique. But there are problems. One, the arrest of the operatives who were in Mozambique. There is no way a country can arrest some operatives from a different country and relations remain the same. We know that between South Africa and Rwanda, there was that standoff. There is still that standoff based on the fact that the operatives of Rwanda tend to come to South Africa and at times they kill the Rwandan citizens who are in South Africa. And therefore, in public, you will never see the body language of President Ramaphosa and President Kagame being communicating a message that there are these challenges. But there are those challenges. Secondly, it is clear, based on how Mozambican president has responded to SADC proposal to implement and to deploy troops there. Yes, he has agreed at the meeting of heads of state because he is the head of SADC right now, but he hasn't signed an agreement that these troops can be deployed in Mozambique. But he was quick to give clear authorization to Rwanda, that belongs to East Africa, to come and deploy, and they arrived early. I mean, this is an embarrassment to SADC while they are still negotiating too. There was an agreement that the command will be led by South Africa and the chief of staff will be South Africa, those two powerful positions. But now we hear rumors that that has been changed. And therefore, if you change that, what could have led to those changes? So clearly there's something that is not right between South Africa and Mozambique in terms of how issues should be addressed.
Sophie, those dynamics have definitely raised alarm bells. And when we actually hone into the SADC region at large, I mean, it was relatively peaceful until recent weeks. We're monitoring situations in Mozambique, Eswatini, and Zambia, and now in South Africa. I think my question to you is, should the citizens of the region be concerned?
Yes, indeed. If you have this kind of stability, they lead to economic crisis. For example, when you look at the visuals in Johannesburg, you can see that Johannesburg is under siege. Therefore, businesses are not operating. People are not moving. Yes, you have level 4 COVID-19 where there are restrictions, but the little activities that were there, economic activities, are now affected. And therefore, this is an economic hub. South Africa is an economic hub. If you have those kind of instability at the center of where you strengthen your economy. Secondly, the Mozambique KZN corridor, the N3, if it's not functioning, movement of goods and services are affected. It's a lot of
SABC
money.
News international editor, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Again, just giving us analysis on what is transpiring within the SADC region. Just like that, we're going to have to leave the show there. It's been an absolute pleasure from myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until next time, it is goodbye for now.